Hey y'all, welcome back. Wow, I was very, very surprised when I was doing research into this video. So obviously you can tell by the title and the thumbnail, it's on Margaret Wise Brown. This whole story was very eye-opening to me. I don't know why there are so many like skeletons in the children's literature author closet, but there are, so it's kind of crazy. Very lively woman. We'll get into it in just a second. I did want to just kind of go over a quick housekeeping item. As you guys may have seen on my post, if you didn't see the post that I made, I will be officially moving to only doing author deep dives and like illustrator deep dives in children's books in that sphere. Just because, for one, it's what I like am really, really interested on, like when it comes to doing like YouTube, like in longer form content, because I like doing the longer form content with people. I think it's really fun. I really enjoy the history of it. I wanted to know more about like the people who shaped children's literature into what it is today. So that's something that I want to do going forward. That's what the whole channel is going to be. I initially stayed away from this because I thought it was going to be boring. I didn't know if people wanted that. And then I realized that's YouTube. I know, it took me a minute. So yeah, so I think I was just kind of throwing myself everywhere because it's all the things that like I'm interested in talking about, but honestly, it was a lot and I'm wanting to simplify, and I think it's also what you guys enjoy the most. So that's what we're doing going forward. So please make sure to subscribe. I would love to have you around. So today we're talking about Margaret Wise Brown, and honestly, I was very surprised by this whole story because you would never have kind of guessed it. I think sometimes these people just really shock you. I'm just saying. So it all starts off on May 23rd of 1910. That's when Margaret was born. And she was born in New York. And specifically, she was born like in Brooklyn, like a Brooklyn area. She was one of three children to Maud and Robert. It's said that Maud and Robert's relationship was really rocky. And so I was really curious as to, because I'm a curious one, when I looked into like their marriage and, what happened, like, why was it so rocky? Why was it so, well, it seems like Maud, now, obviously I wasn't there. I don't know the entire story, but it looks like Margaret's mom was always wanting to be like an actress. She was always aspiring to be an actress. And then she was also really struggling with like depression, like bouts of depression, where there'd be times where she wouldn't even like come out of her room. And I think, of course, that'd be really hard for any relationship between like spouses or like between parent and child. And then Margaret's dad, Robert, he was an executive at a twine company. You don't hear that a lot. So what I found really interesting about Margaret's education growing up was she kind of jumped around a lot. She initially went to school like in New York, but then she actually went to a boarding school in Switzerland. And I read that her parents like were in other countries at that time. So she was like at boarding school, like she was gone at boarding school. It wasn't like a couple hours away. Like they were in totally different places. And then at this time too, so later a diary had resurfaced of Margaret's, which, side note, is it okay to ever read someone's diary and like share that information? I think it's one thing for like close family members to read it, but then to share it, I mean, that's kind of a middle finger. But anyway, so from this diary, she shared that she actually had some very strong crushes on some fellow female classmates. Okay, Margaret. But then after going to this boarding school in Switzerland, then she kind of jumped around to some other schools. And I kind of looked into why was she moving around a lot? Was it because she was having issues? And she was mainly jumping around. From the research that I found, it looked like it was mainly just because of like kind of the family dynamic was kind of unhealthy, or it was more so her wanting to kind of put herself in different positions, like in different education systems, and see kind of what fit her best. So it was kind of all over the place. But we need to talk about Margaret when she was a child. It's said that Margaret was a tomboy with quite a temper. And there'd be times where she was so stubborn that she would actually hold her breath until she started to turn blue. I know. And there was actually one time that her nanny, I guess, had to dunk her face, like her head, like in ice water to get her to stop. Okay. This story, too, I found also kind of disturbing, but it kind of ties into a story later, and I think it makes more sense later. So her sister, Roberta, they had lots of different like animals and stuff growing up, and one of them, they had a bunch of rabbits. So one of the rabbits died, and Margaret took it upon herself to skin the rabbit. I mean, I watch a lot of true crime, And that would be raising some red flags. I mean, I know it was a different time, but I mean, that's kind of weird. But they joked together that she would grow up and be a lady butcher. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see the red flags here? So she later graduated with her BA in English from Hollins University in Roanoke, Virginia, which is so fun because I'm from Virginia. So I was just really excited when I saw that because I feel like you don't really see that a lot. And so she started working at this Bank Street school where she was kind of training to become a teacher. And honestly, they said that she was not cut out to be a teacher. They kind of said that like the people kind of over her and like watching her said that she was just always kind of seemed to be like in a daydream. Like she was more worried about like just like talking and the speech that she was using versus like just focusing in on like running the classroom and keeping it organized and things like that. Lucy Mitchell, so she's quite the character in Margaret's life. So she actually ran this school at the time. And what's really interesting is so they actually had adopted kind of a new approach to children's literature. And at the time it was actually very controversial, which nowadays we would be shocked at to hear that because up until this point, most of children's literature was all about like morals, like always sending, like every single story was going to send a strong moral message. And that was kind of all of it. That was like the bulk of children's literature because to them, that was like the whole reason to have children's literature. Where Lucy and her whole theory was she was concerned about, they called it the here and now. And this became like very controversial in like the children's literature sphere. And it's basically saying like kids need to know like the reality of their lives first. So that's even talking about like the hum of a mother's lullaby, you know, the shape of an apple, things that they interact and deal with on a daily basis to kind of set the groundwork for like what reality is and what's here and now. So this like really influenced Margaret, like when it came to her own writing. She like, this like really spoke to her. And she was also very, very inspired by Gertrude Stein, who was a poet. She just absolutely loved her work. She was like her hero figure. Mitchell herself said that, you know, kids can't really know like the humorous or the preposterous until they know kind of the baseline reality, which I do understand. I do agree with that. Like to a sentiment, because how can you know if something's outrageous if you don't even know kind of the baseline? So Margaret's first book, When the Wind Blew, is actually picked up and published by the Harper Brothers. And it was actually like a pretty moderate success. So when she received her first royalty check, she was very excited. She bought a whole bunch of flowers. She filled up her apartment and then she invited some friends over to celebrate because she was just ecstatic that she got this royalty check and that she has her first book published. She was then hired by W.R. Scott to be an editor for their company because they were wanting to kind of branch out into children's literature. And so this was like her area. This is like where she was going to shine. While she was there and while she was doing this job, a lot of books were published under her, including The Noisy Book, which is a Little Golden Book title. And so one of her projects for the company was to bring on other like writers to create books for like the publishing company. And so she did ask Ernest Hemingway and John Steinbeck to see if they would like to come on. And then apparently they like totally ghosted her. They declined. They did not want to do it. But she was so excited because her muse of Gertrude Stein accepted. So Gertrude's book, The World is Round, was illustrated by Clement Hunn, the same one who did Runaway Bunny and Goodnight Moon, which I love those illustrations, by the way. But it's kind of funny because initially, the way that Brown found Clement was he had done a mural for someone in their home, like on the ceiling, I believe. And that's when she like offered him the job, like, hey, I want you to like illustrate stuff for me. And so his first book was Bumble, Bugs, and Elephants. And this book is said to probably be like the first board book for babies. Now, Lucy Mitchell, do you remember her? Are we remembering Lucy Mitchell? She actually invited Margaret to be part of kind of a founding line of a new kind of writers lab called the Bank Street Writers Lab. And it was kind of just a group of writers who would get together and they were going to write children's books and do that. And here is kind of where Margaret really tested the boundaries of the here and now concept. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I said the story about the rabbit might come back into play later. The story that Margaret wrote and kind of proposed, and even for all of these writers who were kind of in the same thought process on the here and now concept, they were kind of all like, that's a little much. That's a little much. It's about a story. It was a story about two girls who find a dead bird in the woods who was still warm because it was like freshly dead. And they decided to bury it and like make it a grave, which I think is very normal for a child. Like, you know, if you find like a dead animal or a hurt animal, you want to help it, or, you know, you want to put it in a grave because it's like closing off, like it's tying off an end, you know? So I think that's normal. They promised to go back and visit the bird, which they don't. And just overall, the people in this like writer's lab were also kind of taken back. They thought this was just too far. Now, I think everyone's kind of on the same boat when it comes to that one. I think we all think it's, you know, that's probably a little much for a children's book, you know what I mean? But what's actually really interesting is that Goodnight Moon, when it was published, was actually very, very controversial for a few people, and more in particular. Now, the New York Public Library actually banned the book for a long time because Anne Carroll Moore was over the like division of children's book literature, and she did not like the book. She didn't like the book because she thought it was overly sentimental. Like whatever that means. So because of her influence, she was such a prominent figure that the book like did not get her stamp of approval, and it actually wasn't put on the shelf until after Margaret died. So it wasn't until 1972 that the book finally made it into the New York Public Library. And Anne Carroll Moore was the type where she thought that all children's books should just all have messages about like higher truth and morals, which I think that there's a place for that, right? I mean, I think that's true for like anyone, right? Like anyone wants a really good story with a really good message at the end, but there's also nothing wrong with just sweet stories of like the realities that children face. And it doesn't even have to be anything like severe or like harsh. It's just kind of like Goodnight Moon. It's almost like a little like of a lullaby. And it's almost like you're reading it through like a child's lens. Like it's very simple, but you're kind of going around the room. I think that's really nice too for kids to see because it's something that they can relate to and it's like on their level. And then from 1944 to 1946, she actually had a few books published during this time as well. But she actually did it under a pseudonym called Golden MacDonald. I mean, I think we probably could have come up with a better name than that, but it's fine. Apparently, it was from a friend's handyman. That's where she got inspired from the name. Margaret actually collaborated with Leonard Weisgard for a few books. And Weisgard was actually a runner-up for the Caldecott Medal in 1946. And then in the early 1950s, this is when Margaret actually made a couple of the little golden books, The Color Kittens and Scupper the Sailor Dog. And now we get to the little juicy bits, which Marge, Maggie. You know, what's the nickname for Margaret? Margaret? So back when Margaret was in college at Hollins University, she was actually briefly engaged. She never got married, but it was said that she dated some like no one really knows who it was, but she dated a very nice guy from Virginia, a nice quiet boy. But Margaret was not one to I guess stay in a lane, if you know what I mean. She had a very long-running affair with William Gaston, and then she had like a summer romance with another guy named Preston Scheuer. Here's where it gets good. In the summer of 1940, this is when she starts a long-term relationship with Blanche. And Blanche's pen name was Michael Strange because she had the pen name because at the time she wanted to have like fair treatment when it came to like publications and stuff, viewing her poetry and written works fairly. So she used a male name in order to get kind of fair treatment over her written stuff. And so Blanche, Miss Blanche, she was on her third marriage at the time with a lawyer husband who's very prominent. And it said that she would spend her time just kind of gal palling, you know, at the, what was it, like tennis club, one of the clubs. And, you know, she would just kind of just chill, hang out, you know, do her little thing. And so at first, it started off like a mentoring relationship, which Enid, we've seen this before, Enid Blyton, go watch that one, it's really good. Started off as a mentoring relationship and then it blossomed into a full-blown affair. The two did live together at, it's 10 Gracie Square in New York City. They did live there for a while, and they did move a few other times together as well. Blanche, I just like saying Blanche. Blanche was actually 20 years older than Margaret. I mean, am I the only one? Am I the only one who thinks that's a little weird? And what do you have in common with someone who's 20 years younger than you? Or even 20 years older? Like, what are we doing? What are we doing, Margaret? What is this? And then in 1950, that's when Blanche actually passed away from leukemia. And something that I thought was kind of interesting about the relationship was, so Margaret was kind of a firecracker. She was a firecracker in her own right. She was full of life. People say she was full of fire. And Blanche was kind of the same way. So I think this kind of created some contention between the two at some points. And Blanche actually had like disdain for what Margaret was doing, like in children's literature. And she kind of wanted her to kind of, she thought that it was silly for her to be writing children's literature, and she kind of wanted to put that stuff away and like become a real writer. So I think that's kind of a window into their relationship, but obviously we're not there for the whole thing, but I just thought that was very insightful. Margaret was one where she actually had lots of different nicknames from everyone in her life. So William Gaston, who she had the affair with, called her Goldie. To Dana Hall and Holland's friends, she was referred to as Tim, because her hair color was the color of Timothy Hay, so they called her Tim. In 1952, this is where Margaret meets James Rockefeller Jr. And yes, he is like of that Rockefeller. That one, you know what I'm saying? That's money. I see what Margaret was doing. So they did become engaged. I'm not like totally downplaying. I'm not saying they didn't have a relationship. I'm just saying. I was just being funny. The two had planned on getting married like very soon. There were some letters that were recovered when she was in France where she was talking about like their plans. I think if they were going to go to Costa Rica, I can't remember. Oh my gosh, I can't remember that detail. They were going to get together and get married. So like this was like in the works, but actually, so when she was in Nice, France at the time, so like when she wrote this letter, she was actually in the hospital. Now, there's two different accounts. I saw that she was there either for a ruptured appendix or it was for an ovarian cyst. So I'm not really sure which one it is. If you know for sure, let me know down below. But so she was there, and while she was recovering, she was feeling, I don't know if cocky is the right word, but she was wanting to show the nurses how good she was recovering from surgery. And so she got up and started kicking her legs in a can-can style fashion. And unfortunately, this caused a blood clot from her leg to dislodge, and she died. And so she died at the age of 42. That is crazy young. That is so crazy young. And I do believe James actually did write like a memoir about her and kind of like their relationship together. But later in 2022, a profile was done and they actually interviewed James because he was actually one of the only people kind of left alive that like really knew Margaret, like really knew her. And so they got to talking with him, and he did share like a lot of like photocopied letters, and he kind of shared a lot of like intimate things between them to kind of give people a better picture of her. They planned to marry in Panama. That's what it was. I knew it was somewhere down there. But people also said too that Margaret was not one who like actually really like adored children. She didn't really like them, but she understood them. And that was kind of what people said. And this is also kind of backed up too during that interview, because James says this: she was so full in her own life, and yet there must have been a lack somewhere along the line. But whether she would like an ordinary marriage with children, I just couldn't really see that. Okay, I think I have a few minutes left before the baby wakes up, so we're going to hurry. So by the time of her death, Margaret had actually authored over 100 books, and she was only 42. That is so crazy to me. She did 100 books. That's impressive. And so her ashes she was cremated, and then her ashes were spread at her home in Maine. Now, Margaret actually bequeathed all of the royalties from her Goodnight Moon book and Runaway Bunny to the son of a neighbor. And at the time of her death, he was 9 years old. His name was Albert. And it's actually said later that because obviously he got millions from like the sales of the book. I mean, some of those books had never been out of print. So he received millions. And it said later in his life that he actually just like squandered it. He squandered all the money. So now his 4 children actually hold the rights to those books, but they lose those rights in 2043, because then that's when those books will enter the public domain. And Margaret actually left behind 70 unfinished manuscripts. Her sister Roberta actually found all these manuscripts and she tried to sell them off, but she didn't really have any luck selling them off. So she actually just kind of put them in a chest and just saved them there until later in 1991, a future biographer actually got the manuscripts. She got them and now they're held in a museum. One other thing too that I found kind of while researching this. Okay, the baby's awake. Hold on a minute, I'll be right back. Okay, don't eat my hair. Hold on. So what I thought was interesting too here at the very end was they found some of the diary entries of Margaret's later. And now in the beginning, like in her early adulthood, she sounded just kind of like a typical young woman, just so full of life. And it said that she never really fully lost her kind of fire, but she did become a lot darker. And what was very interesting is, the story of The Girls with the Bird is very tame compared to some of the other unpublished manuscripts that she had. So some of the other ones that she had included stories of, I forgot I even had my copy of Runaway Bunny right here. There you go. Some of the other stories that were unpublished included cats being, unalived by unattentive children, and then also a mouse falling to his demise from the talons of a falcon or something. And so it was just very, very dark. And then at times she even threatened unaliving herself. God, I hate that I even have to say it that way, but you know what I mean. She threatened that. And then it's also said at one point too, I did read that she actually struggled with very dark nightmares later on in her life. And so I think she was really battling a lot of mental health stuff. But I mean, who knows? Who really knows what was going on for her? I mean, at that time too, mental health, awareness is nowhere near to what it is today. So that's the story of Margaret Wise Brown. I'm always very surprised by some of these children's book authors because their books have become so well known in our own libraries, in our own homes, and they're just kind of default buys. Oh, Goodnight Moon, heck yes, I'm buying that. But it's funny because in her lifetime she wasn't even able to see it be the success it was, but then also behind the scenes you get the actual people, the real people behind all the stories and everything. So it's very interesting. I think it just sheds a lot of light on the whole thing, the whole gamut. This was definitely a fun one to do. So since going forward, I'm only going to be doing deep dives. Now I already have a list of authors and illustrators that I want to do deep dives on. But if you have any that you're curious about, definitely leave them down in the comments because I'm just wanting to add it to this master list. And I would love to get some other people on here too that are just less known, less well known, because I just think it'd be really fascinating to do a whole bunch of smaller people or maybe people from different countries who are really popular in different countries. So definitely let me know down below what show you like. Please subscribe. I'd love to have you around and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.